Higgs tonight, considering the problems of air travel in Europe. Wish we were there.
The ladies to watch the information screens for their gates.
Brooklyn Spark, Caledonian 905, Gatwick North.
325, good afternoon to you. There's no speed restriction, you cleared 6,000 feet. Caledonian 270, Kenya 593
Captain Bob Cherry hopes to leave for Malaga in 2 hours' time. 300 passengers share that hope, but although check-ins already underway for a departure printed in the brochures months ago, Flight 2516 is still waiting for clearance from air traffic control. For the captain, it's an all-too-familiar story.
It says here 336, 333, 330, and journey slot time. And no slot yet.
In the congestion of a summer Saturday at Gatwick, thousands are already waiting. Hours meant for lounging on the beach are spent languishing in overcrowded terminals. 2/3 of all UK passengers pass through London's 4 airports. More than 20 million will use Gatwick this year. They're now suffering an average delay of nearly an hour. For many, it's much longer. And the experts are warning that passenger numbers will double by the year 2000.
We've got about 4 hours worth of audio cassettes. We've got about 14 gallons of portable drinks. If all else fails, I'll juggle a bit of magic or something. I mean, we're as prepared as we possibly can be for the eventuality.
I just hope that they can sort it out as soon as possible, because it just seems to happen every year. This time last year we were delayed for 12 hours.
I'm afraid that we have to face the fact that we've got 2 or 3 years more where we are going to have to fight the congestion problem, and we must be clear so that the passengers who are coming forward understand that.
Strikes, bad weather and technical problems all play their part, but at the heart of most delays is an overloaded, understaffed air traffic system that is struggling to cope. It's a struggle that's now costing the holiday industry more than £1 million a day. And the scale of the measures needed to put it right, and it could well get worse before it gets better.
Well, I think for the holidaymaker, he's going to go on having the sort of troubles that we've seen him experiencing over the last 2 summers. But we haven't seen too much of the business traveller being delayed to any great extent. And that, I think, is probably going to be the new dimension. It's going to be extremely irritating for the short-haul business traveller, particularly the man flying to somewhere like Paris or Brussels, if the difficulties begin to build up on the scheduled services. And I predict that before it gets better, it is almost bound to get worse. So much so that it will become almost the exception for scheduled services and certainly chartered services to take off on time.
We want to give a service of departing on time for our customers, and we're frustrated in being able to achieve that, because although we do have a lot of slack and a lot of spare in our programs today, airplanes still are sitting around for 1, 2 or even 3 hours just simply waiting for a slot. We feel very strongly we're not getting value for money. The cost of the stress that it creates on the system, of course, is almost immeasurable.
Much of that stress is centred on airline ops rooms. The Dan Air Flight 2516 is just one of 100 problems.
Can you tell her the Manchester November Tango departed Manchester 15:45 Z?
Every flight must be cleared with every air traffic control centre over which it will pass. And that clearance can't even be requested until 2 hours before the flight is due to leave.
Firm, sir, at present we've got a 17:20 slot, but there has been a problem, traffic exiting Coxey, going through Maastricht, they've got a problem. I'll probably have to reroute you going via Redfar, which will mean going up over the top of Amsterdam, down that way.
Thank you, and as far as you know, no delays inbound to London.
Yeah. I don't think so at this time, but this probably will depend on Maastricht at the moment. It is quite a serious problem as far as I know.
Thanks very much.
Just as we were thinking it wasn't actually too bad today, and we were just discussing the flow rates through France tomorrow morning, we received news that Maastricht Control Centre, which controls the upper airspace of Belgium and Benelux and northern Germany, has been closed. And we've got aircraft actually airborne about to penetrate that airspace, and aircraft here and at Manchester about to get airborne going by that airspace. So Barry here at the moment is frantically refiling his flights so that we can avoid that airspace and rerouting flights to Munich, to Dusseldorf, to Frankfurt, to Stuttgart.
It's a massive juggling act requiring constant reassessment. Flight 2516 is doing better than most.
We've got 8 vegetarian meals inbound, but we'll be taking those with us from Gatwick.
As the crew make their final preparations, a slot is made available. If all goes according to plan, Captain Cherry should be on his way within the hour. For some of his colleagues, a strike by French engineers means a longer wait. And even as the Malaga crew make their way towards their plane, there's the worry that a new snag could develop to hold them up even further. They're already delayed by 3/4 of an hour, and any delay on any one flight can affect scheduling for the rest of the day.
But this flight here, Delta Foxtrot, from Berlin to Ibiza, picked up a minor air traffic control delay of 18 minutes, and that, in fact, got slightly worse down in Ibiza because he has to come back through Marseille airspace and got into Berlin 45 minutes late. The airline tends to get the blame, but it's by no means the airline's fault that governments have not invested in the infrastructure we need and demand to be able to operate our business.
Delta 0003, roger, clear to flight level 240.
At the moment, there are simply too few air traffic controllers to ensure that the procession of flights leaving London's airports do take off on time. The problem goes back more than 10 years. While forecasters failed to predict the scale at which air traffic would increase, the economists looked for ways of saving money. When investment should have been made for the future, the Civil Aviation Authority actually cut back on its air traffic controllers.
The attitude that was prevailing at the time, there was a perceived need to reduce investment, to reduce resource. And this, of course, was felt within the CAA, who attempted to conform to the recommendations placed upon it by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission. So too were the airlines emphasizing the need to save money and to reduce investment where at all possible. I might say too that the airlines themselves were to some extent caught short in investment as well. And so it was an aviation industry-wide lack of foresight rather than simply the CAA, but I wouldn't exonerate ourselves for that.
214, report passing 3,000 feet.
214 passing 3,000 feet now.
214, turn right heading 180, base left.
So serious is the present shortage of controllers looking after London's airspace that the CAA has been forced to redesign its training program in a bid to speed up the introduction of new recruits. But with the safety of millions of passengers at stake, that training is still long, expensive and labour-intensive.
Turning left onto 240, leaving 65 for flight level 40.
160 new controllers are needed right now. Even with the new streamlined programme, that shortfall won't be met for 2 years at least.
For a long time I thought the CIA made excuses and pretended the problems weren't there, but in the last 12 months I am clear that they've taken a very serious view of it. Politicians have. At the end of the day, CIA only serves the Secretary of State for Transport, and Mr. Shannon and his predecessors, perhaps his predecessors in particular, didn't take it too seriously. Mr. Shannon did, and we now have an investment that looks impressive, £650 million over about 8 years. Truth is, it's a quarter of what British Airways will spend on aircraft in the same period. So we shouldn't get carried away. There is some political will, there is some investment. It's all coming very, very late in the day. Not too late, but late in the day, and it won't help in the short term.
Cabin crew, can you get to your doors to do a door and slide check, please? The door pressure should be 716. Door pressure 716.
For flight 2516, the waiting's nearly over.
We'll go for an A-flat departure, which takes care of that traction.
Right. 37A is on this side of the width.
40 minutes late, the Gatwick control tower confirms takeoff for Malaga.
This is not unusual for a Saturday afternoon on a flight down to Spain and Malaga and such places. I don't think it's related to the present air traffic technician strike in France. It's just one caused by sheer congestion. There's just so many aircraft wanting to go, and that a 40-minute delay this time on a Saturday afternoon is not unusual.
Hello, 2516, proceedings on a right turnout. You're clear takeoff.
100 knots both. B1.
Britannia 034 Alpha, call London 1284.
1284, bye, Britannia 034 Alpha.
B2 97 Papa is clear to land on 26 left, the wind is 250, 12 knots.
Speedbird 316 with you, just passing 3,200. Thank you, 316, 6,000 feet, no speed.
Captain Cherry is now negotiating some of the busiest airspace in the world, passing from controller to controller. Taxiing, takeoff, climbing and cruising are each handled separately. It's a system that places obvious restrictions on the number of flights that can be handled and obvious pressures on both controllers and crew.
Well, we had 3 frequencies on the ground at Gatwick. We had 2 London frequencies, and we're now on our second Brest frequency, so that's 7 individual controllers so far.
How much extra pressure does it put on you and on your colleagues, the fact that you are constantly changing from one controller to another as you go through sectors, and often a number of controllers within each country?
Yes, it's just more work and more pressure.
Traditionally, there used to be peaks and troughs, periods of very intense activity, and then slacker periods, and busy summers and quieter winters. Well, the truth is there are no slack periods anymore. It is just a period of intense pressure from the moment controllers go on duty at the big centres like West Drayton or the airports like Heathrow and Gatwick to the moment they come off. It's showing itself in a higher incidence of sickness than we've had before. It's certainly showing itself in terms of controllers themselves feeling at the end of a shift that they just want to go and sit in a quiet room somewhere and not talk to anybody, including wives and families, while the world comes back to normal, their world that is. So I think the pressures are very considerable. What no one knows is, of course, where the breaking points are.
Now we can see that both protected areas are separated.
This is the new system which should alleviate some of that pressure. It will simplify the whole London air traffic system and increase capacity. Called Central Control Function, it represents years of work in which traditional air traffic sectors have been replaced with so-called tunnels in the sky.
We can see here the sector which has been prescribed for the Heathrow inbound controller from the northwest. And each sector is divided into segments which shows the vertical extent of the airspace which is able to make use of.
In the future, a pilot leaving any of London's airports will only have to deal with one controller in English airspace. It's a system that's been proved in parts of America, but here it won't be in operation until the mid-90s. When it comes, the CAA maintain it will mean the number of planes flying in and out of our airspace can be increased by 30%. But our airspace is just part of a far greater problem.
For our part, we're making every effort to try and improve the system. We're called the National Air Traffic Service, and we must provide a service. But I really cannot foresee what's going to happen in Europe, and as we've seen this year, it is so important that the situation is seen as being smooth throughout the whole of Europe. Any one country can actually bring the system down at present, and of course we must bear that in mind.
Zero initially, proceed to D-North, Cognac, and confirm your requested level. Feet. We clear 6,000 feet, clear 85.
We're about a third of the way there. We're over the southern end of the Bay of Biscay. Still in French airspace, we're changing into Spanish airspace about 5 to 6 minutes, 30 miles to the north of Bilbao.
In terms of air traffic control, the 2-hour flight to southern Spain is one of the simpler European trips. Even so, before landing at Malaga, the crew will have spoken to 3 different controllers in French airspace, 3 more covering the Madrid area, before finally being handed on to Seville. Air routes across other parts of the continent have to take account of the different procedures and technical standards of more than 40 control centres.
We're limited, and today's swap time was for congestion. Our delay on it was for congestion. Congestion is caused by the limitations of air traffic flow within Europe, part of which is the fragmentation problem and the relatively small areas and the number of controller changes there has to be.
What we must achieve, and we're not achieving today, is sufficient cooperation between all the various air traffic control centres in Europe. There is too much barriers around each little segment. And the fact, of course, we have so many air traffic control centres to fly through, that there is a tremendous waste in manpower and indeed in cooperation of getting the best flow throughput.
The notion of a European answer to the problems of air congestion is hardly new. It's nearly 30 years since Britain joined its continental partners in a fine-sounding organisation called Eurocontrol. But just as Eurocontrol, based here in Brussels, began to come up with some answers, the politicians began to have second thoughts.
Political leaders in this particular field failed to recognise the burgeoning nature of air travel that would occur. I myself was an aviation minister in the 70s, and certainly the problem did not seem to be anything like as grave as it is today.
Why is it, do you think, that so many politicians appear to have got it wrong?
It was a vicious circle, really. The problem was that the issue of sovereignty tended to become more important as the years went on than the question of adequate and efficient air traffic control. I don't think aviation ministers saw the nature of the problem along the scale that it actually developed. And more than that, I think that people were not, of course, travelling in the numbers that they're actually travelling in now. It's very difficult to predict all these things. You can be wise with the benefit of hindsight. But we are faced now with a problem which requires a radical solution.
For more than 20 frustrating years, the officials of Eurocontrol have been trying to make just that point.
The administrations finally did not support this work, at least not in the way they could have done this. And we have lost many years. I would say we have lost more than 10 years in the last 28 years unnecessarily. And if member states would have worked together and would have agreed to build a common air traffic control concept, then we wouldn't have the disaster which we have today.
In an effort to avoid even more disastrous congestion, Eurocontrol is now beginning to be allowed to do the job for which it was created. From across the continent, millions of pieces of flight data are being collected in preparation for the opening of a central flow management unit. It won't happen until 1993. But at least then it should mean an end to frantic conversations across Europe as controllers try to find routes and timings for their planes. Space in the skies won't be increased, but what space there is will be used to its best advantage.
At the moment in Europe there are 12 flow management units, and to negotiate a slot for the departing aircraft you would have a series of communications. Now if you centralize that and you have one unit having the knowledge of all the demands and the declared capacities and all the alternatives there are, that would be a big step forward.
There's no doubt but that one single system that's coordinating all of the nations in Europe will clearly be much better able to organize the flow. And this is what the Central Flow Management Unit will do.
Do you regret the fact that it's taken so long before many European countries, including our own, have realized the need for a Europe-wide system?
Yes, of course. I think we must regret that fact. However, there is certainly a need that is recognized now, very well recognized. The political dimension of the need is recognized, and indeed it was our own Secretary of State last year who took the initiative to bring into Eurocontrol a completely new, almost a sea change, if you like, in the way that they were going about their business and the central way in which they were going to coordinate air traffic flow management in Europe.
Hotel India Oscar, contact Maastricht now 13335. Good day, sir.
Hotel 35, bye-bye.
For many, the coordination of Europe's airspace must involve the coordination of the controllers themselves. Welcome to Maastricht, and a unique control centre which could represent the future.
Speedbird 395, contact London 1296, good day, sir. Britannia 593 Delta on the present heading for descent now to flight level 310, please.
On present heading descent level 310, Britannia 593 Delta.
And November Mike Alpha, contact now London 1296, good day, sir.
This is Eurocontrol's pride and joy, a centre that monitors planes in 4 different countries. Anything flying over Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland and parts of Germany deals exclusively with this control centre.
Speedbird 857, can you do so 1,000 feet a minute or more and reaching flight level 310, please?
We've just turned right a little on to...
If a dozen such multinational centres replace the 40-odd control systems now in use, the whole process would be simplified radically.
So the aircraft's not going out until 2130G, and I think it might give them a bit of time.
For the airlines back at base, the introduction of such a system across Europe would mean a lot of pressure being taken off the overworked ops rooms and a great many more flights taking off on time.
We are operating in an international sphere. Aviation is international, and we're also moving to a single market in Europe. It seems quite simple to me that we can and should achieve a pan-European air traffic control system. And I believe now there is more of a will there. Unfortunately, of course, these things take time. And I recognize that, and that's why I keep saying that I believe we must be getting more out of our existing resources.
Europe's major airlines are now so desperate for government agreement on a united air traffic system, they're offering to run it themselves. But though that offer hasn't been rejected out of hand, in Whitehall it's being stressed that problems of sovereignty and military airspace mean agreement may be some time coming.
In the past, Eurocontrol got wound up with its own internal problems. Ministers got fed up with it. Well, things have got to change. And the other thing that I think is terribly important is for governments to recognise that no single government can actually solve these problems. They've got to be dealt with at a European level, not simply community level, but at a European level.
But if easing the snarl up in the southeast skies is the first step, then there's the more down-to-earth problem of airport congestion. As extra airspace is freed, planes will need more runways and terminals. Heathrow and Gatwick are already working at full stretch, so where's the extra capacity to come from? All agree it must be found. The argument is how.
There is a tremendous amount of runway capacity at Stansted. Currently there, an excellent runway with a lot of capacity for future flights. And if we had more runway capacity at the moment, we wouldn't get any further because of the air traffic management problems. So London has a lot of runway capacity available for several years to come.
Unless we have got an adequate number of terminals, an adequate number of runways to take care of the number of passengers we are told by all the estimates are going to wish to fly in, say, the year 2005. Unless we take care of those things, then frankly, Britain's aviation will grind to a halt. Now that seems to me to suggest that we really got to look at where we do need additional terminals, where we do need additional runways. And I'm one of those who believes that certainly so far as additional runway capacity is concerned, there really is going to be a need for another runway. It's going to be somewhere in the London area. Everyone tells me that it should be south of the Thames, and of course that leads one to believe that it should be at Gatwick. I appreciate the opposition to that, but that is my view, and of course it's the view expressed recently by the Transport Select Committee when they investigated the whole matter.
Within the next few months, the Civil Aviation Authority will tell the government whether Gatwick is the right place for a new runway in the southeast. But it's ministers who'll make the final decision, a decision on which even the airlines cannot agree.
Certainly we see the need for a second runway in the southeast, and that must ideally be at Gatwick because that's where the vast majority find to be their convenient local airport. So it makes common sense that that second runway should ideally be at Gatwick.
I've thought that a second runway for Gatwick disappeared about over 10 years ago, when certain promises were rightly made, I think, at the time to people around the Gatwick area. And since then, the airport at Gatwick has grown up over the ground where a second runway could have gone.
For today's passengers served a diet of delays and congestion, decisions on new runways may not seem the most immediate concern. But if the decisions, both on the ground and in the air, aren't taken quickly, then tomorrow's tourists will fare little better than today's. For the industry, the worry is that those tourists will decide it's simply not worth the wait.
Boring, isn't it? It's a drag. You know, you pay all this money to go abroad and spend most of your holiday sitting in the airport.
It would certainly put me off of coming in the future, yeah, because if they can't get their act right, then, you know, an hour or 2 hour delay could mean quite a bit of time for us travelling as well. It means a day, really, travelling, getting to the airport 2 hours before, and then getting away 2 or 3 hours late. You know, it's a day lost.
Malaga approach, good day. This is Danair 2516 and a descent to flight level 100 inbound to Martin. We have Quebec.
2516, it's copied okay. Cleared for ILS DME approach, landing 14, QNH 1012, speed 240 or below, please.
So in fact we're cleared for an approach, aren't we now? So in fact, for the moment then, let's have 5,005.
When we attacked the A325 or booked for coming to train in the morning, one thing that we find in UK is that transport in all its forms needs a lot of attention. And I think all of us in transportation in the UK probably need to think ahead much more than we've done in the past.
And down we go.
Thank you. You now live in 198 and please make speed 250 or 240 knots if you can. Continue for...
I really cannot foresee what's going to happen in Europe, and as we've seen this year, it is so important that the situation is seen as being smooth throughout the whole of Europe. Any one country can actually bring the system down at present.
Clear land, runway 14, Danair 2516.
Charter 50 X7, straight time, planning to stall out.
I think that people in the community countries and elsewhere are making their views felt in a way that the environmentalist view has been expressed. People are concerned about safety, they're concerned about their inconvenience, the loss of holidays, loss of business opportunities and so on. They're not going to put up with it. So politicians are going to have to respond. They haven't done so in the past, they're going to have to do now.
200. It's on salmon, sink 8.
$100.
On salmon, sink 7.
50, 40, 30, 20, 10. Two green.
The difficulties we're experiencing in the late 80s and are going to experience in the early 1990s, I think stem directly from a lack of investment in the middle of the present decade. Now, you can blame the government, you can blame the CAA, you can blame a whole host of people, British Airports Authority, as it used to be. The fact of the matter is that you simply cannot catch up on the enormous backlog of investment that's needed to improve the situation simply by the flick of a switch.
For the passengers of Flight 2516, the Spanish sunset awaits to make up for the moments of misery at Gatwick. And over the years to come, it seems those that follow must find similar compensations. With no instant solutions, no miracle cures, millions of passengers look destined to endure the terminal boredom of the annual airport delay.
I must apologise for the poor sound quality at the beginning of that programme, and also an apology to some viewers in East Anglia who've not been seeing the programme they expected.